Urban Land Institute Kentucky chapter, who sponsored our first session, Planning 101. Kentucky Farm Bureau, Fayette County Farm Bureau, that sponsored our second session, Promoting Our Farms. And again, to Winter Quarter Farm, who has donated a Keeneland box, which we will be giving out to a lucky attendee who has perfect attendance this year at Citizens Planning Academy. So we will make that drawing for the winner of a Keeneland box at the end of CPA. So again, we have such an incredible group of people, and I'm so appreciative for all of those, again, of you who are choosing to spend your evening with us and have done so for the past 3 weeks. But if you're joining us for the first time, we'll do a brief overview for this session as well. That's why Zoom is nice, because you can, you're able to tune in whenever you're able to attend, and we're glad that you're here. So we are so proud to present Citizens Planning Academy at Fayette Alliance. I'm Brittany Rothmeyer, I'm the Executive Director, and I'm joined by our team, Ashley McGuire, our Director of Education and Government Affairs, Madeline Bede, our Director of Communications, and Mary Gilbert, our Office Manager. So thanks to my team for making this all possible. So I did want to give you all a quick overview of Fayette Alliance and what we do for those of you who maybe have missed out on the prior 2 sessions. So we are a nonprofit land use advocacy organization that is completely funded by donations from engaged citizens like all of you attending tonight. We are dedicated to achieving sustainable growth in Lexington-Fayette County in 3 major ways. The first is land use advocacy. So we work hard at City Hall to advocate for policies to sustainably and equitably grow our city and preserve and promote our farms. The second way we achieve our mission is through research. We know at Fayette Alliance, and we're very fond of saying, that the question is not if we grow, it's how we grow. And we focus on how we grow by working with experts to conduct research on the complex issues facing our community's development and growth. The third way we achieve our mission is through education. So this Citizens Planning Academy is our premier and signature educational offering from Fayette Alliance. We want citizens to get involved and understand that the issues affect our community do affect all of us, and give you more of a foundational understanding and knowledge about those issues. We also have various in-person events that are now happening on Zoom to hear from local experts on a variety of smart growth topics throughout the year, which we call Citizens Planning Academy, or CPA for short, 2.0. So stay tuned for those events and continue to watch your email, where we do dive into some other topics outside of Citizens Planning Academy as an additional way to engage our community members. So through our programs, our newsletter, and our various social channels, we want our community to understand on a broad scale how land use decisions impact our community's economic development, our environment, and all of our quality of life, as well as how to advocate for smart and equitable policy. So before we jump in, I do want to mention a few housekeeping items. So number 1, everyone, as they entered the program, is on mute. So if you could please remain on mute until our breakout sessions, and at that point unmute and maybe get on video if you can. And we ask that any questions that you all have throughout the session and throughout hearing from our panelists, that you put into the chat. So one of our team members is going to put a message there into the chat box, just letting everybody know, as you have questions throughout the session, please put them in that chat box, and we will get to them in the question and answer portion. If for some reason we don't get to your question before we go into breakout sessions, we will be following up, as we do with all of our sessions, with an email that we'll send out tomorrow. That will include resources, again, for our session today, as well as answering any questions that weren't answered in the question and answer session with our panelists. So we'll reach out to them, we'll gather our own resources, and try to make sure that we get as many of your questions answered as we possibly can. So again, if you don't get your question answered today in the live session, we'll be sending out a follow-up email as well. And that will also include group notes from our breakout sessions, which I think are so interesting to look at. So I encourage you, if you haven't looked at those yet, they're always included in the day after follow-up email. So I highly encourage you all to go back and look at those. It's really interesting to see and hear what other people are talking about, how they're answering these questions, how they're taking what they've heard from our panelists and putting them into conversations with fellow citizens. So everyone should have received your packet of information in the email that went out on Monday. And that included the agenda, the Zoom link. It also included breakout session questions that you all can reference when we do break out into those sessions. as well as resources. Again, if you weren't able to go through all of those resources, I know there are quite a few. I highly encourage you all to go back, especially after you've heard from the panelists, and look at the links and the documents that are listed in that resource page that we've included. In addition to that, the term definitions. We've tried to identify the major terms we'd be talking about, but we want everyone to be on equal footing as far as what they mean. So again, I think it's really helpful before the session as well as after the session to go back. Once you have context for some of these things, go back and take a look at some of those links if you have time. Read the reports and the studies and the articles that we've linked there. We think that they just further the understanding of the issues that we've talked about in all of these sessions. So as a reminder, we discussed Planning 101 in our first session and promoting our farms in the second session. And today we are discussing responsible infrastructure like water, sewer, and transportation. And then next week we will discuss growing our city. We hope that everyone can join us for our fourth and final session next week. I did also want to note that in addition to our session next Tuesday evening, we will also be hosting a lunch and learn on equity and land use at noon, where we will hear from our keynote speaker, Chris Zimmerman from Smart Growth America, which is a Washington, D.C. based policy organization. This session is in addition to our CPA sessions. So it's certainly not mandatory that you attend, but we highly recommend it's open to everyone in our community. So we highly recommend that you all register and sign up for that lunch and learn on land use and equity next Tuesday at lunchtime at noon. And that will be from 12 to 1. Chris Zimmerman from Smart Growth America, who will be speaking at that keynote lunch and learn, will also be on our panel for growing our city that evening. So if you're not able to join us at lunchtime, please make sure to tune in next Tuesday evening for our Citizens Planning Academy session, where we'll be hearing from him again. So we're really excited to have someone from outside of the community provide a little perspective as to how equity and land use are being addressed on the national stage. So we're really excited to add him to the conversation. In addition, based on feedback from our surveys that we've had after our sessions, we wanted to add one additional session for those who are interested and can attend. That will be 2 weeks from today, so Tuesday the 18th, and that will be a putting it all together. It will be an overview session, and the majority of it will be a breakout session. We just want you all to have more time to talk with your fellow citizens, with your fellow attendees, about the questions and the topics that we've addressed today. So stay tuned for more information on that, but I just wanted you to know, if you're able to tune in on Tuesday the 18th, we'll be having one additional voluntary session called Bringing It All Together. So tonight we're going to start off hearing from our panelists, and then we'll have time for question and answers, and then we will go into our breakout sessions, where we'll go into random groups of about 5 people to discuss what you learned this evening before we leave. So before I introduce our speakers, I did want to talk a bit about infrastructure and what we hope that you can glean from the conversation that we're going to have with our panelists this evening. So infrastructure is the foundation of our city and a key element in considering how our city can and should grow. Infrastructure really allows cities to function and truly connects our citizens to each other and to our regional and global economy. So our urban services boundary was put into place in 1958 as an infrastructure boundary and as a way to focus resources for infrastructure like sewer and roads and transit in and around our city core. So limiting the sprawl of expensive city infrastructure is really critical to sustainable and equitable growth, as well as to a high quality of life for all of our citizens, especially for underserved, low-income communities within our city. Research shows that if we invest in infrastructure that is resilient and truly connects all of our citizens to different parts of our city, we will be more prosperous as a city and our quality of life more sustainable for future generations. Research also shows that, especially with the impacts of COVID-19 on our cities and our country, making green spaces, transportation, clean water, and walkable neighborhoods accessible for all, especially our underserved, lifts all of us up and makes a better city for each and every one of us. Responsibly built infrastructure is critical to redevelopment, making the best use of the land that we have, building diverse and affordable housing, providing access to jobs and opportunities, and the list goes on and on. Today, you're going to hear from leaders, local leaders whose work is making equitable infrastructure investments happen here in Lexington. And we'll hear about ongoing initiatives as well as opportunities for building an equitable future in our city. I hope that you leave this session knowing more about why time and money spent on infrastructure betters our community, how it can make our community more successful, more equitable, and what our city is doing as we speak to work towards those ends. So it's my pleasure to introduce our speakers. We're so glad that they're here, that they're taking time out of their busy days and evenings to join us. Christian Motley, Scott Thompson, and Stan Harvey. So first we'll hear from Christian Motley, who is the Lextran Board Chair and Senior Manager of Policy and Partnership at Strive Together. Scott Thompson is the Senior Transportation Manager at LFUCG and has led the Open Streets Initiative for the city, as well as focus on bicycle and pedestrian access. Stan Harvey is a Lordak Sargent Principal in the firm's Urban Design and Planning practice area and is the Director of the Lexington office. So without further ado, I would like to invite Christian to speak to us first. Christian, welcome.
Hi, Brittany. Let me take 1 second and
Sure.
get my screen shared here.
No problem.
Everybody see that?
Yes, we can.
Perfect. Thank you, Brittany and Ashley and the team at Fayette Alliance. Good to be with you all. I see a lot of familiar faces here on the screens that we're getting so used to using in our day-to-day. Yes, my name is Christian Motley. I serve on the Lextran board. I've been on the board since 2015, and I'm in my second term on the board and my second year as board chair, and just really committed to the work of our team, both in the building, our leadership, and our operators and maintenance crew that make everything go every day. Here I have some slides that really are just to kind of ground conversation. I have more slides than my 10 minutes allow, so I apologize if it seems like I'm kind of zipping through, but I do want you to have some grounding so you can make sure we have enough time for the other speakers and the conversation that we'll get to have after. So with that, I will get going. First, I have to start with our mission statement. We serve people in our community with mobility solutions. We start every meeting that way, and every piece of material that you see from us will have that mission. We're all committed to that mission. I have a couple quick slides that are just kind of show Lextran at a glance. You'll notice we have both our fixed route buses. We have Wheels, which serves as our sort of paratransit opportunity for some seniors, folks with certain disabilities, and that's like a door-to-door service. We also have something called Vanpool, which is it's kind of like a commuter bus. A lot of folks use that to go to Frankfort. You'll see that most folks use public transit in Lexington for work or for school. And is there anything else on this sheet? I think that's good. Let's keep moving. You'll see some references to 2019 here. The slides that you have, there are a few of these slides that you see here that are presented to both us as the board, but also sent on to City Council to approve our budget each year. And so, we highlighted for them our new CNG buses. I'll talk a little bit more about our fleet replacement. We have 71 buses, but we have a lot of buses that are getting close to or beyond what we call their useful life. And so we are currently implementing a strategy to get more buses. We are improving our stops, adding shelters, improving basically the sidewalk area in layman terms. So folks, for example, who are in wheelchairs do not have to sit in the mud as they wait for the bus. So a lot of those kind of projects are made possible by the really good year that we had in getting some federal grants in. One of the things that I was really proud of last year was also this the art contest with students. And so if you ride around Lexington or walk around Lexington, you'll see that there is one bus moving around the city that does not look like the others. That bus is actually designed by a Fayette County student, and it's the result of a contest where, we just opened up the opportunity, said, if there's students here who want to submit art, we will wrap the bus in that art if you win that contest. And we had 60 young people who responded. And my hope is that we continue to have those kinds of opportunities in the coming years. Get to see sort of the when and where, the when and where. You see our bus routes, sort of the time and days of the week. We're constantly moving. Of course, you see our door-to-door service that is implemented by Red Cross. And of course, I mentioned the van pool. Folks use LexTrend for a number of different reasons. For some folks, it's cost. For the sort of savings that they find being able to use public transportation. There are folks who are environmentally conscious and want to make sure that we're reducing our carbon footprint. And there are others just convenient. You get to ride, and I've found, I think it's called Grown Up TikTok, where they make steaks. So I can kind of scroll through TikTok while I ride. So it does add some convenience. Again, who does it serve? Again, very similar to the slide before. But the one thing I want to impress here is that, it's for everybody. Our public transportation system is that equalizer. We want to make sure that, anybody who needs to go from point A to point B has that opportunity, and LexTrend is the service that provides that. By the way, again, it is helpful. It helps us to be good stewards of the environment. It helps to cut down on traffic and so much more. You can kind of see the multimodal ridership over the last few years or so. Our fixed route, again, those are the buses that you see on the road every day, stay pretty consistent. We're seeing some growth in, we have a partnership with the UK where students ride certain routes on campus. And we've had that partnership for the last few years. They have their own pass, and we've seen that grow. And then our paratransit and van pool staying kind of consistent. Again, we serve the community and not just with mobility solutions, but we know that, that mobility has impact, about $52 million in impact on the city's economy, support jobs. We have the opportunity to leverage federal investments. One of the things that's really important to me is the work that we do in community. And so, partnerships with organizations that we provide training to. I'm thinking of Kentucky Refugee Ministries, making sure folks know how to use the bus. We have folks on staff who sit upon many community tables, present to neighborhood associations. So if anybody, you can see our, I guess you can see the last few meetings. We've been having our meetings virtually the last few months. But if you go back and look at our board packets, you might notice that, I tend to ask a lot of questions about this piece, just our community reach, because I think it's just important. There's certain tables in the city where we're having more conversations about how the different sectors and systems interact and talk to each other. And I think it's important that LexTrend is always at the table, and we are in most cases. And again, really important that we are leaders in the stewardship of our environment and sustainability. Gotta mention some challenges and opportunities that we see. Can't go too far in this presentation without talking about COVID and the impact that it has had. I've done my best to, I've just had to shout out the team at LexTrend, the leadership, our operators and maintenance crew that is making sure that even in these tough times that we are providing this important service to the community, that we do it in a way that honestly, that is nimble. And, we're seeing, executive orders come down from our governor. We see actions at the federal level and making sure that we're always in compliance from the top down, but then also making sure that our team is safe. And so we currently, if you go to get on a bus, you shouldn't be charged for that ride. We know that there's a financial impact that this thing has had, and we know that is helpful to folks. We also know that, gosh, when you go get on the bus and you got to insert your money, it's $1 a ride right now. You get pretty close to the driver. And so we also want to protect our operators. And so if you ride right now, we'd ask you to get in through the back door in the bus. We're also exploring putting up if you go through Kroger right now, you see there's a plastic barrier. We're exploring having that sort of option for our operators as well. We're kind of getting ready, preparing for this thing to, again, go through the end of the year and potentially be dealing with this early in the first quarter. Currently we're preparing to have conversations with our bargaining unit. I've talked about the aging fleet. We have lost state funding, and toll credits are kind of complicated. And frankly, many of us on the board are still kind of understanding the impact of those. But what's important to know about toll credits at the state level is that they are a non-cash resource that we can often use as a match for federal dollars, and we've lost those toll credits, and so it just makes it more difficult to be able to get those federal dollars in. Federal dollars are what we use for capital projects. So I mentioned the Canopy project a little bit later. I've talked about RAMP, which is the program, the initiative to improve our bus stops. But what is the last thing I wanted to mention? The Canopy, the bus stops. Well, anyway, we use the federal dollars for a lot of things, and we need to make sure that we can get those match dollars in. That other thing will come back to me. Also, I mentioned, you saw the multimodal graphic earlier. We're seeing a lot of things around the country. I've been curious. Sometimes I go peek and see what they're doing over in Louisville. I think there's an opportunity around building stronger infrastructure among the multimodal systems. And so between not just public transit and not just wheels and van pool and the things I've mentioned already, but rideshare and scooters. And there's lots of conversation about automation. I'll mention bus rapid transit here in a little bit. And so just taking stock of all the opportunities that exist, even as we meet this challenge of COVID. This is you see the diversity of our fleet. Early on when I got on the board, what I was hearing was just the importance of having a diverse fleet so that we weren't overly reliant on, for example, diesel fuel prices. So as those things the price kind of fluctuates, and fuel price is very important in this business, something that I've learned just in my time on the board. And so it's important, almost like the way you would diversify your financial portfolio. We have diversity in the way that in our vehicle fleet. But we also, again, have the opportunity to show leadership and sustainability. And so, I'd like to see more electric buses, more hybrid, and so on. And so as we create our fleet replacement plan, it'll be I won't speak for the board without the board being here, but it is a big priority for me. And I do believe that we'll continue to bring those new vehicles on. Sustainability initiatives. LEED, I learned about when I was a student at Berea. There is a building on campus that is a platinum LEED certified building. And I'm pretty sure like the sidewalks are made out of plates or something. So it is very sustainable. We happen to be silver here in Lexington, but it just means that our facility is LEED certified, green approved. We have a Canopy project. That is that would cover the space in the back of our facility where our buses sit. And there's just a number of opportunities we have there. One of which is just the way that as we bring on more electric vehicles, it helps to have those. And there's something, again, I'm kind of speaking off the cuff now, but something about, I think we're gonna have like a green roof or something like that, which will help with runoff. Again, learning about some of these things as I sit on the board. And so just naming that sustainability is just a big priority for us. Folks tend to have a lot of questions about how we're funded. Our budget is about $32 million if you include our capital funds. Our primary sources, at the local level, property tax, and I believe it is 6 cents for every $100 from property taxes. And from the federal, we get, there's nothing fixed, but usually we use those for capital projects. The state also varies from year to year. and really is helpful for us to be able to leverage again for federal funds. And then of course the partnership with the UK, the passenger revenue, which again, that sort of dollar that you pay when you get on it, it helps. And then advertising revenue, you can see a quick breakdown here, but you see just how much property tax impacts. I'm gonna try to motor through the last bit of this. Ramp project I mentioned a couple of times, just improving the bus stop, sidewalk connections, benches, shelters, and other amenities. It's important. These are data informed decisions. So really the board had a lot of questions about, how are we choosing the bus stops that are being improved. And it's, for the most part, it's looking at the data for the place where riders start the most. So where are those places where folks are beginning their trips in the day the most? Transit center improvements, big priority, I think, not just for me, but for our entire team, I think, is around Bond Street and making sure people cross that street safely. Right now, I think it's a little touch and go. I want to mention quickly the study on Nicholasville Road. I just think there's a lot of opportunities there to make improvements for those pedestrians walking, biking, or using transit. One interesting idea, if you go to Imagine Nicholasville Road, rd.com, you can learn a whole lot more. There are one-pagers there and case studies. But one thing I'm interested in is the prospect of having bus rapid transit. And we could have a whole nother conversation about that, but what it mean is along Nicholasville Road, imagine sort of having a dedicated lane, something that kind of felt like riding the metro if you've been to DC or some of these other places, but wasn't, so fixed, moved a lot faster, maybe fewer stops. So, just a lot of opportunities there. And I think one of my other colleagues may mention this as well, but if you want to learn more, go to imaginenicholasvilleroad.com. The comprehensive operations analysis is a big old, a few $5 words just to say that we're taking stock of the landscape for our system, hearing from our riders and our team. And this is sort of a big kind of data collection effort that we take on probably every 5 years or so, that just helps us make certain decisions around, for example, if we made any service changes on routes or anything like that. We want to always make sure that it's backed in evidence, which is, again, a priority of mine. But we're undergoing that now, and we got some big decisions to make here in the next year or so. I should say, particularly, if there are any large adjustments we have to make relative to COVID. I just want to throw that out there. There's that thing. Again, we want to make sure our workforce is healthy. We know that we're seeing a decrease in ridership. I'll show you a slide that comes up now, but we want to make sure that we always have this service to be able to serve the community. We are making adjustments that allow you to do social distancing. There are some funding uncertainties, and I mentioned them before about state government. There's been talk at the federal level about there being some potential for infrastructure bill. I think it's kind of taken a backseat to some current priorities, but it's something that's still there. We did receive some funds through the CARES Act that I think will help us bridge over certainly the next several months or so, but it's something that we're thinking about. And then fear of transit, I saw a video or a photo of folks on the train. I think it might've been in New York, and it was a full train in the height of this COVID kind of quarantine. And that frightened me. And we had a little bit of a conversation about it at the next meeting. And I'm just glad that, I think that we, and our team, I should say the team at LexTrans, just made every effort to make sure that riders are safe, that our operators are safe, and that, this is a service that we can serve the community with, even through this challenging time. I think I'll finish up with just this quick. We look at graphs like this at each meeting because we're constantly monitoring our ridership, and you can just kind of see, right around March, February, March, our ridership started to take a dive. For the most part, it's because everybody had to stay home. And what that meant was that at LexTran, many of the folks who were riding were, they were essential employees. So in addition to our essential staff who are working as operators, are the service that we provide, frontline workers are hopping, or riding, every single day. I'll stop there for now and look forward to questions later.
Thank you, Christian. It's always so interesting. I mean, LexTran is just such a crucial part of our community, accessibility and transportation, and really connecting our citizens to our city. So all of that information is so helpful, and we'll definitely circle back. I know people had lots of questions, so we'll circle back after we hear from Stan and Scott. But next we will hear from Scott Thompson, who I mentioned is the Senior Transportation Planner at the city, leading the Open Streets Initiative, and is focused on bike and pedestrian access. So Scott, I'll invite you to share your screen.
Okay. Are you seeing my slide presentation?
Yes.
Okay, great. Well, thank you, Brittany and Ashley, for getting us together, and the folks at Fate Alliance, obviously, and for all of the folks that are taking time to get more involved in our community and understanding various aspects. Obviously, we're focused on infrastructure today. I'm sure you've heard from other folks in planning. And so just to kind of get started, I want to give you just a little background on where I am in the planning hierarchy and what's unique about us as an MPO. So as Brittany mentioned, I'm a senior transportation planner. I focus mainly on bicycle and pedestrian planning. And I work for the Lexington area MPO. And our MPO is unique in that it's housed in the local government here in Fayette County. Now, we do transportation planning for Fayette and Jessamine County, but by being housed in the local government here, it allows us to better coordinate across all levels of government, local, state, and federal. We have a lot of interaction across the different sections of planning, like long range and planning services. We're heavily involved in their processes as well, and they are in ours. And then, of course, working with our District 7 office and central office of KYTC, and then, of course, FHWA and the federal level, which is where our funding comes from, and the funding that we funnel into the various modes of transportation. We do touch all modes of transportation. If it moves or ships, it's a part of our process. So planes, trains, cars, bikes, people. So we touch a little bit of all that. So just to kind of give you an idea of where we are. So let me get started here. See if it's going to let me select my next slide. Okay. So I like to start off with this slide for a lot of reasons, but if I were going to sum everything up in one slide, this would be it. It really is pretty simple. If you plan cities for cars and traffic, you get cars and traffic. If you plan for people and places, you get people and places. And that's a quote from Fred Kent. And there's variations of this all over the place, but it's very true. And it's not just people and places, but if you plan for cars and congestion, you get cars and congestion. And there's other adverse effects to that type of planning. And so obviously most cities in America, including Lexington, spent several decades, if not a century, really planning for cars. And because of that, that rule applies to most of our arterial roadways. So if you think of our roadway network, kind of like a circulatory system, our major arteries, which would carry the most blood, are what I'm talking about. And so if you look at this picture, it's a perfect example of who gets to use our roadways. And this is no one's fault. This is just how planning went for many, many decades. And about 30 or 40 years ago, Fayette County and Lexington decided to try to start to move that dial in a different direction. And so I think it's important to understand that most of the transportation infrastructure says that if you can afford to and have the ability to drive a motor vehicle, then you can safely access all of our community. And so I think that's important to understand that to truly be equitable with infrastructure, especially transportation infrastructure, you have to move everybody, no matter what their age, what their ability, if they can drive a car, if they can't drive a car, if they can afford to drive a car, if they can't afford to drive a car, if they just choose not to have a car, right? So there's that equitable piece that I'll talk about more as we move forward. And I'm not trying to be doom and gloom. I just wanted to kind of paint a picture of where we are and how we began to move away from that and are continuing to move away from that and have really made big strides over the last 20 years. And it really is beginning to snowball because infrastructure is beginning to catch up with that demand for bike and pedestrian infrastructure. So, as a planner, we're always looking at what are the existing issues. And so, how do we get from here to here? And what we planners all like to do is make plans. And so that's what we did. Lexington really started getting serious about bike infrastructure probably in the early 2000s, but it was probably 2 decades before that things started to change, and we started to see more of a focus on including bike lanes, bike facilities, and sidewalks, probably in the late 80s and early 90s, but 2000s is where it really started. And we developed our first bike and pedestrian master plan in 2008. And then in 2018, we did another plan because things had changed drastically as to how this type of infrastructure is implemented, how it's designed, and then just how we are going to move forward as a community to get to that goal of a connected network. So obviously there was a vision associated with that. I'm not going to read through all of this because this will be available to you and you can look at this plan. And then we came up with some objectives as to how we would get there. And I think what really was important about this particular process is connectivity is a key piece, right? I mean, imagine if our roads didn't connect, you wouldn't be able to get anywhere. It's very similar to people who don't have access to a vehicle or maybe even to transit, and they need to be able to get places. And so that connectivity piece is huge. Increasing safety, obviously across all modes. We found that when you have roads that are designed for everyone, you lower traffic fatalities across the board. Obviously, the biggest difference is in vulnerable users, but it certainly decreases the number of vehicle-to-vehicle collisions as well. And then increased mobility, because that's what we do. We need to help people have the same amount of mobility that everyone else does. And then some bonuses to that are promoting equity, making sure that we have an equitable transportation system. It certainly encourages economic growth. If you look at the communities that are continually bringing in new industry and new jobs, they have the best multimodal infrastructure in the country, and it goes hand in hand, and we see it across the country. And another real positive impact is as your mode shares increase to more active modes of transportation, you get that public health improvement piece as well. So with any plan, we engage in public outreach, and with this particular plan, we did some unique things that we hadn't done in the past, but you can see it's all geared around that public input first, then groups of key stakeholders. We had a steering committee that helped us bring those key stakeholders in and also helped us with that public outreach. And then we worked with a consulting team as well as the staff at the MPO to develop the plan and coordinate with the state and federal government on certain aspects of it. We had some opportunities for people to provide input, surveys, online surveys, and then that general public outreach. And these were some of the things that we heard and a lot of things that we knew, but it just was reinforced. And then some things that we didn't know, some things that we found out, which is really the great part of that public participation piece. Something that we did that was unique to this plan and that we've started to incorporate into more of our studies and planning processes was an interactive map. And what was cool about this is it allowed people to go into a map and kind of tell us where they think there are problems. And then they could see areas where someone had already input comments or talked about particular things. And so you can see that just from this graphic, it kind of shows areas of concern for people, both for bike improvements and pedestrian improvements. But I think the real takeaway from this is just how effective it was at actually getting real pinpointed information from people in a quick and easy fashion that makes it more conducive for that public input. So this was a great part of that process. One thing that we realized and are continuing to work towards is that if people are going to use or be successful, and we're going to be successful with a multimodal infrastructure system, we have to design for all ages, right? If you're 8 or 80, you need to be able to use that facility safely. And so this graphic kind of depicts what we call the 4 types of bike riders. And one being the strong and fearless, which is that 2%, which is about our mode share in Lexington. So that tells you who is currently using our infrastructure. Enthused and confident, folks that will use a bike lane, but really prefer some type of facility, either in the roadway or out of the roadway. But the group that we're most interested in getting to use the bike for even short trips and maybe some commuting is the interested but concerned group. And that's really where that 8 to 80 design falls in. And then there's this 35% that said, hey, I'll never get on a bike. I love my car. This is how I'm going to do it. No big deal. But I guess the point to this is that if we are going to build an infrastructure network that is truly equitable and works for our community, we have to be designing for this 60%. The other 2 and 5% will ride on it anyways, right? So we need to make sure that we are focused on our infrastructure on folks that won't ride on the roadway and prefer a better system. So this is just another graphic that kind of breaks down what those different facility types are. And so I won't get too in the weeds on this, and I'd be happy to answer any questions anytime about any of the different types of facilities. But this is just something that FHWA, the Federal Highways Administration, put out. And it's very recent data, and it talks about what people want in infrastructure and how safe they feel. And again, it just goes back to that 8 to 80 facilities design. And then something that came out of our bike plan was this design matrix that you see on the left-hand side of the slide. And that really helps us get a beginning point as to what type of infrastructure we would put in place based on the amount of motor vehicles in the roadway and the operating speed. And it's just a starting point. It says, hey, we're going to put a facility here. This is where we need to start. And then we need to take a closer look to see what we really need there. And we've actually adjusted that to be even more cognizant of speed. So it's actually all shifted a little bit to the left. So our bike lanes are generally going to stay in the 30 and under, 35 and under range. And even then, we're very cautious about that implementation. It doesn't mean you won't see bike lanes on roads that have higher speeds than that, but ultimately we would replace that with something that's much more effective at getting that 8 to 80 design. So we looked at after doing all this analysis and bringing everything together, we broke the bike network down into kind of a level of hierarchy with these major bikeways, the minor bikeways or feeder routes, and then the local bikeway network, which is that first and last mile, that short part of the trip. And so that's kind of what infrastructure at full build out would look like in a map. And you can see much of it resembles a lot of our roadway network. And that's because a lot of the infrastructure will be adjacent to roadways. Some of it won't be, but it will be at least somewhere in that corridor with some exceptions to that rule. But it's not just about infrastructure. The plan outlines, how do we get there? And policy and programs are a key part of that. And so the plan also looked at short-term, mid-term, and long-term policy and programs to help get people to choose biking in a sense. And I think that that's important to understand because we know people are going to drive, and that's never going to change. And we want people to drive. There's no, this isn't an either or. What this is really about is making sure that people understand that at full build out and during in certain areas as the network grows, you'll have the ability to choose a different mode, even if it's just for short trips, which ultimately leads to less congestion in our roadways. And then of course, design and evaluation. I mentioned that we had already changed that matrix from the bike plan, and part of that was some evaluation that we had done of some infrastructure that we realized that maybe wasn't to the level that it needed to be for the conditions that it was in. And so again, we are constantly looking at performance measures to determine whether or not the decisions that we made were effective. And that's important because, again, we want to make sure that we're designing and funding infrastructure that works for everyone. So we also developed a strategy for implementation. So obviously we had the recommended networks that came out of the plan. We prioritized those based around safety, demand, transit access, equity, gap closure, and mode share. And we do that through mainly through Esri program, ArcView-GIS, which is a geospatial program that allows us to look at American Community Surveys data and census tract data, things like number of vehicles per household, income levels, access to a transit route, how close is the transit route to those locations, what is the mode share, meaning, you know, is there a high mode share of walk, transit, or bike to work in those areas? And that helps us kind of spit out a project list that's prioritized. And that's kind of a first look at things. We use the data to drive the scoring, and then we kind of give it a truthing. We look at it, look at those prioritized projects, and see if it's working. And if it appears to be working, we start to break them down individually, and we look at each individual project for a constructability assessment. And that really starts to get into how do we implement these things and what are the financial implications for these things, the cost estimates, things of that nature. And so what that gives us the ability to do is look at cost to benefit and analysis as well, and then to appropriately look at what kind of funding source are we going after for this. Is it local? Is it state? Is it federal? Is it a part of a major road project? Is it a standalone project? So there's a lot of factors that go into that. And then from that, we get kind of our easy wins, our short-term priority projects list. But that doesn't mean that every project on there is a low cost, you know, high impact project. It just means that those are the projects that through this process were identified as the most important, and we should be focusing on moving those forward. And it could be connectivity or some other aspect that pushes it to that place. So one example of that is this project that is still somewhat fictional, but looking at moving forwards. And this is a cycle track on limestone that would extend probably from Main Street all the way up to Loudon Avenue and be a big connection up to the north side of Lexington. And it looked at, you know, what would our public right-of-way look like if we used it differently? What happens if we give some of that space that we use for vehicles back to people and bikes and businesses? And can we do that? And so this is one of many examples of projects that come out of the plan. But I thought this was a good graphic representation that kind of show you how that public right-of-way can be used all kinds of different ways. We just have to vision it and make sure that it'll work effectively. And so this is one example of that. I did want to talk a little bit about some of our current policy and study initiatives here at the MPO. I think Christian talked a little bit about Imagine Nicholasville Road, and so I'll kind of bring that up again. Kinsey Gleason is our project manager on that project. Her contact information is up there along with the website, so I'm pretty sure they're going to make these presentations available to you, so you'll be able to click on those links to take a look at those. And you know, Imagine Nicholasville Road is really to help make sure ongoing redevelopment of the corridor aligns with our community goals to provide more housing units and housing options. The study will also look closely at how we can move more people efficiently along the corridor, including improved transit service. So I think Christian touched on that a little bit, and how developments can be more walkable. You know, if you want to have a harrowing experience, try to walk from one end of Nicholasville Road to the other. And some sections would be great. Other sections you will fear for your life. And so this is an example of how our different sections kind of work together. You know, both land use and transportation planning greatly affect one another. And it's incredible how much they do. And it's hard to even pinpoint which one has the greatest effect, but you certainly see it when you look at things like, you know, the number of people trying to get somewhere at different times of the year, or even in different, intervals of years, right? So if there's a land use that is drawing a lot of people, then that changes the dynamic of the transportation network that gets them there, right? And then that leaves, and maybe something is somewhere else, and then all of a sudden you've got, you know, a different scenario somewhere else. So, you know, it's very important for us to look holistically at a corridor from a land use and a transportation perspective to make sure that we can effectively move people through that corridor safely and reliably. That I think is something I didn't hit on very much, but reliability in the transportation system is key. And if you're sitting in traffic, or if you are sitting still, or if there's a collision or something that causes you to have an unreliable network, there's ways to fix that. And we can design solutions that will work for everyone and make our corridors more effective at moving people. So this is a great project. There's lots of opportunities to be engaged in this. And so I would suggest that you take a look at that if you have time. And we're still in the process, so there's still time for public input. And then something else that is an initiative through the American Heart Association, the local health department, and Lexington CHIP, which is a Community Health Initiatives Partnership, I think. I hope I didn't get that wrong, but if I did, I apologize. But they're looking at trying to implement a complete streets policy. So a lot of what we do at the MPO and in planning already incorporates a lot of complete streets aspects. But having something at the policy level really helps to ensure that those initiatives continue over time. And so the American Heart Association and the Health Department and some other local organizations, I know I think Fate Alliance has been at the table for several of these meetings, are working to develop a coalition that supports this and is attempting to move this forwards. Obviously, with they were kind of getting started in January, February of this year, and with COVID-19, things kind of have stalled out a little bit. But we have had some correspondence with Shannon and Natalie over at the American Heart Association, and they're interested in getting the conversation back going again and trying to figure out what the path looks like moving forwards for them as they continue to push this initiative. And so lastly, I just included a few links to some various reading materials and or informational reading, as well as opportunities for public input. So the first one is the MPO's website. As you can find a lot of information there. You can sign up to get emails, and we don't inundate you with things. We generally use that when we're looking for community input. So if you get on that list, it's great. We will come to you when we need input. And so you obviously like to be involved, so please take that opportunity. I did include a direct link to the Connect Lex plan, which is our bike and pedestrian master plan that I kind of briefly went through very quickly there. And then Imagine Lexington, which is the long range planning thing. I'm planning a site. I'm sure you have seen that probably in other presentations. And then if you are having trouble sleeping and you're looking for something to cure your insomnia, you can take a look at the zoning ordinance or the land subdivision regulations, because I assure you will be asleep in about 2 to 3 minutes after you begin reading. But that's all I have for today. I could go on and on about a number of things. So I can't wait till we break out and have some conversations about planning and transportation planning in our community. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Scott. You're right. I mean, these are, and honestly, like all of the subjects that we've addressed so far in CPA, each of them could be its own 4-week course. It's so complex, but it's so interesting. And this is another reason that I encourage all of you all to really check out those resource pages and continue to check out our website. We're putting the presentations on the website, so you all can go back through these and pick out pieces, that you're particularly interested in. And I definitely encourage you to do that. So lastly, I'd like to welcome Stan Harvey to share his screen. Like I mentioned, Stan is the principal and founding director of the Lord X Sargent office here in Lexington. Lord X Sargent is a nationally renowned urban planning firm. And we're also really lucky to have Stan Harvey as one of our board members. So he's such a key piece in the policy aspect of what we do around smart growth. And we're so fortunate to have him in this community and have him on our board. So Stan, I'll turn it over to you.
All right. Well, good evening to everybody. I'll try to be brief and wrap it up and really build on the foundation that Christian and Scott have laid out, because what I want to talk about when Brittany told me about this subject was kind of how you bring this, the things and the programs and the issues of transportation and infrastructure to neighborhoods and places in Lexington. I'm an architect and urban planner, and I remember sitting in my first graduate school class and my professor said, the single greatest urban design move that's made in the United States is the investment of its infrastructure and transportation network. It shapes everything about the city. It shapes how people get around, its equity, its cost, and the place, how it shapes place and the land use. It all reacts to that system. But unfortunately, I think most would say that's not necessarily done in a comprehensive way historically, at least at times. It's been a little bit haphazard. So I wanted to talk for a minute. I began my career and spent 15 years living in Atlanta and practicing in Atlanta. And Georgia and Atlanta are not necessarily known as the urban design cutting edge, but they really have created over the last 20 years by necessity some pretty remarkable programs that really link the idea of development and planning. And then I thought I'd talk a little bit about some of the projects that might happen here in Lexington. So what Georgia has done by necessity, the traffic is horrible, congestion's awful, they're poster child for doing this haphazardly at some level, is they've created 3 levels of programs. Christian and Scott would probably attest that one of the biggest challenges in Kentucky and across most of the country is funding. These are expensive projects. They take multiple years. There's multiple ways you want to invest in communities. So what Georgia has done, which I think is pretty remarkable, is they first allowed a statewide sales tax. So Kentucky does not allow that. There has been some effort to try to do that, to allow local sales tax to be created and dedicated. In Georgia, it can be dedicated to schools or to infrastructure. So most every county in Georgia has a dedicated sales tax that goes back into some form of community investment, either infrastructure or schools, or both in some cases. Locally, they allowed the creation of self-taxing districts, which are a lot of the things I'll show you, where they increase their property tax voluntarily in the interest of dedicating it towards certain local projects. And that's been a tremendous resource to leverage other money. And then finally, they've used the federal grants and programs, which is the majority of infrastructure funding in the United States that Christian and Scott touched, but they created a pretty remarkable program with that money called the Livable Centers Initiative. So I'm just gonna talk a little bit about that because I do find it's one of the more interesting models I've seen. This will advance. So what the Atlanta region did, so the Atlanta Regional Commission is the Metropolitan Planning Organization, or MPO, that Scott works for here, for Jessamine and Fayette County. They struggled like most MPOs. They program a lot of money, it flows through them, but they didn't have a lot of influence into the quality of how infrastructure and land use necessarily was held, because that's a very localized decision where projects understandably boil up. So they created the Livable Centers, or LCI program, as a carrot. They basically said, we're going to take part of all the money we get from the federal government. We're going to set it aside into a program called the LCI program. It's made up. It doesn't really exist. It's just a local program. And what we're going to do is we're going to use that to incentivize our local communities of a wide range. Could be neighborhoods, nonprofits, cities, community improvement districts, transit authorities, et cetera, we're going to create a program that incentivizes them to do comprehensive planning. So to Scott's point, linking land use and transportation investment. So we're going to give money to that. But more importantly, we're going to create a pool of money that the only people who can apply for it are the people who do those smart growth plans that link land use and transportation. So we'll take a little portion of the region's money and we will create this incentive program where you can get 80% of your dollars, for the most part, coming through the federal allocation to do infrastructure investment, but it has to be part of a plan. So this has been, in my opinion, phenomenally successful at changing the mindset. Because by making an incentive program, it's voluntary, it's localized, but it really changed the notion of investing in multimodal transportation within the region at multiple levels. And I wanted to touch a little bit, Brookings Institution and ULI have done a lot of work talking about the sustainable nature of investing in transportation that is more than just cars. And Scott touched on this in his opening slide too. But it's really, it's public health issues we talked about, but it's an economic issue. So on the development community, a lot of the development community has come along very quickly in Atlanta because the places that are retaining their value and sustaining themselves and becoming less congested are the places that kind of have this balance. So there's a lot of research, and I think in Lexington, what it's applicable to, that 880 that Scott talked about is really a similar theme to this idea of, if you design it first and foremost as how it will be experienced walking and taking transit, the other modes come with that and get integrated, but you have to start with that mindset of what kind of place you're creating. So this is a little bit about it. There's 122 different communities or organizations in the Atlanta region that have done LCI studies. They have incentivized that through almost $17 million over 20 years in study funds. So you can figure that out. It's about $800,000 to $1 million a year they've put up as competitive grants. And so you apply and you say, here's what I'm going to do. And that's really key to getting, Lexington and some of the studies Scott's mentioned on, those are all locally funded. The city of Lexington or the MPO has to take some, limited funding, which is great. But this kind of jump-started doing more of that. But what the big number is to the right, which is $237 million in projects that have come out of that, that are out of this program. That area, because most of these have been a heavy focus on transit, you get extra bonus points if you're doing this particularly around bus systems or transit systems or the MARTA subway system. That has totally changed the mindset and led to an increase in kind of the growth and development around these LCI communities. So a few examples just to touch on. Some of these are very big, what you would call a regional center. So you can imagine Fayette Mall. This is North Point Mall, which is north suburbs. What you can see a little bit to the left is it's a mall with a lot of parking lots and suburban strip centers, and a big highway, Georgia 400, that goes through the middle of it, and big super blocks of big arterial roads. So what the LCI plan did was try to break that down and start building smaller scale local roads, investing in open space. So one of the eligible projects is actually you can build parks and kind of infrastructure that's considered supportive of walking and gathering and biking. So a lot of those have ended up being linear park systems and others that are related to transportation investment. They've also tried to calm and create ways, even where they have the interstate, where you have shaded pedestrian and lighting improvements. So there's been a lot of projects that have come out of that. It's also incentivized these ideas of planning for corridors. They're a different kind of thing. And this is very applicable to Lexington, which is really built around 9 spokes. So this idea of doing comprehensive planning, like Scott was mentioning on Nicholasville Road, that's just one of those spokes. Thinking about both the transportation investment and the land use. But this has been even in the suburbs and in relatively rural places. They have used this to build, big key is these gaps, these big roads and things you're trying to retrofit. So there's been a lot of retrofitting of pedestrian bridges and dedicated bike lanes, and cycle tracks and other things and trails that Scott mentioned. This is one of our clients, probably the best client I've ever worked for. This was a strange town in about 25 miles outside of Atlanta that had a 2-block downtown, and said, we're going to use this program to create a place and to invest in the park and transportation network from scratch. So this has basically all been built. This was just a field and a forest, but they have built a town center through this LCI program very much. And then they got private development to come along. All of this development that's filled in, these are townhouses and housing and other things. This is their new city hall, has all been built around this idea of building this livable center for this suburban town that didn't really have a center. It was just kind of a lot of strip malls and other things because it grew up later. But this has happened and just been repeated again and again and again across the region. These investments in these places by the planning and the implementation, both existing towns that just kind of improve themselves, in older towns and historic downtowns, and new places that were built. This happens to be Tucker, which is an in-town suburb. You can see a little bit, the gradation they were investing in, it really gets down to a pretty finite grain of detail in terms of how you plan for pedestrian and bicycle circulation and transportation investment in local roads, even down to, in their case, they want to take all their old alleys and reclaim them as public space and transportation systems within the downtown area. So what does that mean for Lexington? One of the things the Fate Alliance has been promoting is this idea that we can look across the city at places that are not, that are more mixed use, non-residential. So our commercial corridors, this is something Imagine Lexington's brought to the forefront. The centers, you think about Beaumont and Hamburg and Fayette Mall and the old Turfland Mall and the area that's growing along Citation, and you can think of these different layers of sizes of town centers. Some of them are more neighborhood oriented and some of them are serving the whole city. So that's the underutilized property survey that Fate Alliance did a few years ago, and it was about looking at where could a LCI kind of program, you could think of where could it be applied, the same notion. It could be applied and is being applied already in things like the Imagine Nicholasville Road study. Some of the work we've done locally, you can think of it in neighborhoods, and this idea of how you link even existing to existing neighborhoods. This happens to be, investing in a greenway and trail network, and the idea of Versailles Road, which is in many ways the gateway to the city because of it functioning to the airport, to Keeneland, to downtown. But this idea that it's a pretty inhospitable walk, just like Nicholasville Road is. So a lot of this plan was dealing with, and it's a heavy transit route, a bus route. And so can you make multimodal improvements there for bikes, for transit? Can you start to look at investment, particularly in public space and transportation sidewalk network in the neighborhood, like in Oxford Circle or on Alexandria Drive? This is a precursor to the current Imagine Nicholasville Road. We actually were involved with looking at the BRT's alternatives analysis, like is it feasible? You can see off to the left this idea of similar ideas. That's Fayette Mall and Dillard's to the left, if you can see, in Nicholasville Road. But how do you start? You can, with a few imagery and a few ideas, start to think about how something could feel extremely different than it does today and make that investment in the corridors of the city. And then finally, you've probably heard about and talked about the largest infrastructure project that's ongoing in the city right now is Town Branch Commons, which all told, is around $50 million plus in infrastructure investment in dedicated trails, park system, bike, and other infrastructure, tying together what will be then a 22-mile system of ped and bike facilities on the west and north side and through downtown Lexington. So I know we're kind of running late, so I didn't want to spend too much time, but be glad to fill in, but just wanted to talk a little bit about the importance of, we can still look at planning some really great places and making some infrastructure investment within the city.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Dan. We appreciate that. And so in the interest of time, I'm going to get to a couple of the questions, but like I said, we will work to reach out to the panelists and have any questions that we don't get to tonight answered so that we can send you guys answers. So we can also do the breakout sessions as well. But something that a couple people have touched on and that I wanted to really, for all three of our speakers, get your all's perspectives on, we're an advocacy organization, and we are dedicated to advocating for policies in the community. And so I think from a citizen perspective, I think a lot of people have questions about how can our citizens or our neighborhoods get involved in advocating as it relates to transportation, for the expansion of bus routes, priority and infrastructure projects, in addition to input, like Scott was mentioning about, when it's requested by the MPO and things like that, how would you all say the best way for citizens to get involved or express, their priorities and hopes for our community to each of your respective fields? If each of you all can touch on that, that would be great.
I hesitate to go first because I fear it may not go first every time. I'm not going to do that. But as a member of the LexTran board, the first thing I would say is, engage the board. Peek in on the meetings if you can. Reach out to folks like me and other folks who are on the board. What I've learned about LexTran is that there are some things that there's a pretty nimble team there, and so there are some things that they can do fairly quickly, given the data and feedback that we're getting on the ground. But there are, I mentioned the large analysis project, those $5 words I mentioned earlier, that we're going through. That kind of process, we really need to hear feedback from the public during that time. I'll do, some work on my end to make sure that, I'm kind of pumping it out and making sure folks know LexTran does a good job of pumping it out, make sure folks know, that's an opportunity for not only community, but staff and folks in community have an opportunity to give feedback on some of the planning that we do. And we are responsive. My first meeting at LexTran was about service change. It was a fiery meeting. But it needed to be. And what the lesson that I took from that was that, if you come and you participate, you will impact the decisions that are made.
Thank you. Scott or Stan, do either of you all want to speak to that? How citizens can get involved in these projects and how we prioritize these projects?
Yeah, I can talk a little bit about that. I think what's really important is that, understanding that I'm a technocrat of sorts, right? Like I have we were guided by these policies and purse strings that were given, and so I encourage people to reach out to their local, state, and federal leaders and let them know that these things are important to them. We see a lot of what they get, and a lot of it's kind of complaining and things of that nature. But I think when people really reach out and let the people know that those things are important, that turns into policy and funding that goes towards those things, because those folks really want to hear what people desire in a community, and I think that's very helpful. I know Stan mentioned that between the commons and legacy phases and all that's around $50 million. Well, the majority of that money, well over 50 to 60% of that is federal tax dollars, and those are federal tax dollars that could go to any community in the United States. And our local officials, our state officials, and our politicians at the federal level helped us and worked hard to help us get those grants. We worked hard too, but having that support really helped bring that stuff home. And again, we did have to invest locally in that, but if you're looking at a very, not insignificant, but a very small percentage of those dollars coming, that could go to any city in the country, I think those things really help. And obviously, we want to hear from you too, because that helps us say, here's what we heard from the public. So anytime you can engage in anything that happens, including like the On the Table events, things that Fate Alliance puts together as well, and then any of the planning processes that we have, it's always beneficial to hear from people and have those discussions, because we work for you. I mean, and that really is the truth. And so we love input. So that's kind of my spin on that.
No, I think those are great points. Yeah, like you said, reaching out to your council members and your elected officials about how you feel about these issues is absolutely important. And feel free, to reach out to us as well if you have questions about who the best people to contact, are for these different issues that have come up in Citizens Planning Academy. And we're happy to do a little digging and figure out who that is and put you in touch with people. This is a great question, especially as we've been talking so much about equity. So as walkability, bikeability, green spaces, et cetera, improve in neighborhoods and communities, what are some ways to ensure lower income folks are protected so rising rents, property taxes, and demand don't force them out? So, people can stay in their homes as we are improving neighborhoods and improving communities. And, community-wide, these issues we're being faced with those right now. How do we put policies in place to prevent, while we make investment to prevent displacement, and also make sure the investment that we're making is benefiting not only the people that are making those investments, but the people that live in the existing communities. Stan, have you seen this in other communities as well? And have you seen, as the LCI initiatives that you were just talking about, did they also talk about policy to prevent displacement and things like that?
Yeah, I think what happened, it's a really good question because it is a challenge. I think there's two things. First off, you got to calibrate, there's a calibration in terms of investment and infrastructure. For the most part, the LCI program is not in neighborhoods. It is mostly in kind of larger, at least shared areas, centers or, large places like Fayette Mall or whatever. But it has touched some of the smaller communities and neighborhoods. And I think the category of investment there is more about maintenance and improvement and enhancement than kind of huge major investment for the reasons that are mentioned. But the other thing that's been interesting to that question is about 10 years into the program, they realized it was being so successful, but those layers were missing. But so they launched a program about affordability and like auditing the plans and looking and demographically and at real estate trends and whatever, and seeing where they're creating new housing opportunities, not just preserving housing opportunities and rents, but are new opportunities being created that are affordable. And so they've kind of re-incentivized the program towards that. But they also looked specifically at seniors. They realized there wasn't enough investment happening in kind of aging in place and in new senior. And that, of course, is as y'all are maybe aware, that is over half of the projected growth in Lexington the next 10 to 20 years will be in those over 65. So it's a huge issue for the city. But what I will say is that the LCI program did create this framework of organizations, and they could kind of easily start going in with those regional programs and apply them to all these centers, because there was kind of a built-in plan and there was a built-in sponsor and structure that was in place. So I do think it probably helped a little bit to have these LCI communities, but it is a continual balance. I recognize the issue because you do want to kind of calibrate, like I said, and make sure there's kind of strong community input, back to the question before, on what are the priorities. Is this really reflecting investment that's needed here that would serve the people in the area?
Right. Yeah. And so we're very hopeful, and why we wanted Chris Zimmerman from Smart Growth America, to come and talk to us as well, specifically about equity and land use, and what policies are we seeing here in Lexington that are being discussed, and what policies are being discussed and implemented on the national stage that address that balance, because it is incredibly important as we make these investments, making sure that, again, that the benefits of those investments are experienced by all people that were already in the communities that were being improved, and new people coming into those communities. So we're very dedicated to continuing to explore that and examine how we can protect those communities where the investment's happening, while also continuing to encourage the investments that make these communities, because making these investments truly does have the potential and opportunity to better all of our communities.
Brittany,
yes.
Brittany, you mentioned just policy efforts that were being discussed. I know it was, I believe it was 2018, because I think, particularly the first and second district in Lexington is where we're seeing a lot of this. And Councilman Brown, James Brown, had pulled up a proposal. I don't know that they had done anything formal around it, but there was discussion around, I think there was a model in Philadelphia where folks who own their homes, as a way to sort of fight gentrification or the negative impacts of gentrification, like they might have, like their property tax may be dealt with a little bit differently than others.
Right.
And other places where I think of large cities like DC and some of the other places that are seeing like more rent control facilities jumping up. But that property tax proposal from Councilman Brown, I think is something that it was in discussion before. I thought it might pop up in the new recommendations from the, what was it called? It was the gentrification task force, but it had a different name.
Neighborhoods in transition. Yeah.
So I expect it'll probably pop up again when we hear the feedback from the Racial Justice Committee task force, excuse me.
Absolutely. No, that's a great point. Yeah, the Neighborhoods in Transition Task Force, is in the process of formalizing those recommendations before COVID. So I definitely second that. I think that is being worked on, and then the Housing and Gentrification Committee of the Mayor's Task Force on Racial Justice will also be looking at that. So I'm hopeful that we're having those conversations and working towards implementation of some excellent policies, because there are examples, to your point, nationwide of policies that are being implemented to address these issues. But it's really important that always that's a consideration when we're looking at these investments. And so I do want to leave time for breakout sessions. And so we had so many good questions, so I'm sorry that we couldn't get to all of those. But again, we'll be looking to answer those for you all. So please be on the lookout for that email tomorrow. Some great questions about Town Branch and the economic opportunity around Town Branch, planning for Winchester Road Corridor, the Reimagining Civic Commons initiative that's being forwarded by the Knight Foundation and otherwise. So thank you all for your questions, and we'll make sure and get to those, but I do want to make sure that we get to breakout sessions. So we are going to copy and paste the breakout session questions into the chat here, just so you all have a point on that. For our speakers, thank you all so very much. We're so grateful to you all sharing your knowledge and expertise. Would welcome you all to join the breakout sessions. If you can't, we understand that too, but if you're able to stay around. And so I'll let you all do that, and then hopefully we'll be running a few minutes over, but hopefully you can come back to us. I'll wrap up some things and then we'll bid you good night. So thanks again, everybody, and enjoy your breakout sessions.
Hello.
Hello.
Hey, we're in the same breakout room again.
Hello, hello.
Hey.
Now you can hear me.
Yeah.
The amateur hour tonight here at my house, for sure.
Oh, good. Claire, can you hear us?
Yes, I can. I'll be back in a minute.
Okay, no worries. So I do not have to lead this discussion, but I can if you all want me to. I don't know if the questions were posted in the chat per usual.
Yeah, they're in there.
Okay.
Whoa.
Bless you.
Sorry.
You're good. I'm going to pull up the questions because I don't see them real quick. We are, like Brittany said, doing a wrap-up session because each week we have not had enough time to really dive in these breakout sessions, and we want folks to be able to do that more and in a more fulsome way. We're doing that on the 18th, so no rush tonight, but generally, what are you all thinking right now? What are your thoughts on responsible infrastructure?
I just think it's cool that a city this size is working so hard to make things more walkable and less car dependent. I grew up in Detroit, where things are also very spread out, and a lot of the public transportation was pretty much gutted after the 60s. But, you know, in a place like San Francisco, Chicago, you know, all these other large cities, you can get around. You don't need a car. A lot of my friends that still live in those places don't drive. So I don't know if that's necessarily the end goal to get people not to drive, but I think that the fact that you all are trying to make this concerted effort to get people to get around by other means is just really, really cool. And I think it's probably one of my favorite subjects that we've learned about in the past 3 sessions. So
Awesome.
I always get kind of geeked out on transportation, and I don't know why, but I'm glad that everybody's thinking a lot about equity too with this at this point, because I think about transportation a lot working at the food bank, because I'm constantly talking to people who can get access to our services but don't have any way to get there or any way to get their food home with them. And a lot of times if they're alone, if there's just one of them coming and they can't, you know, and it's just one person riding the bus, they can't take enough with them on the bus because they've got to walk here and there and then ride the bus with enough food for a family. And so it's just all those things kind of play together. We've had some issues with some senior citizens this summer with COVID and the senior center being closed and them trying to get their commodities boxes and using wheels and some different things. And it's been a lot of challenge, and but it's been a special challenge, you know, over the summer. But I think about some of those challenges that go on just kind of all the time for folks who either can't drive or don't have cars, can't afford a car, and how difficult some of those things really are.
Yeah, absolutely. Who else? Anyone else?
I was particularly impressed by the presentation about LTI as a way of approaching chunks of urban planning in a balanced way with all kinds of incentives. I just thought that was very clever, and I wonder how that could work in Lexington.
Yeah. Yeah, like Stan said, I think that we're, you know, the city is looking at how to do that work similarly. And absolutely, like when we look at these issues, we have to be thinking of equity. I'm really excited for our land use and equity conversation next week and talking about growing our city more, but infrastructure is a huge piece of that. So we actually kind of just answered the first question already. Let's see. What topics discussed today most affects you personally is the second question.
I can speak to this one just in terms of the button. So I sit on the Lextran board, but I tell you, I've sat at the bus stop and been frustrated that I can't, you know, get where I want to go as fast as I want. And for us, it means, you know, trying to, you know, how do we get more buses on the route? And, you know, how can these strategies, like we talk about on Nicholasville Road, for, you know, things like bus rapid transit, you know, how can that help us, particularly for choice riders, folks who are saying, you know, I'll leave the car in the garage, I'll, you know, I'll take this ride. And how do we make it easier for folks who need that service and need to be able to get to that doctor's appointment, need to be able to get to work on time, and how can we build better partnerships? We do have some, I think about like maybe certain facilities, I think medical facilities that we know people need to get to, making sure that the routes are strong there. Maybe certain, there might be certain, I'm thinking about just like jobs, places where people work that we know are kind of priorities. I'm making sure that folks can get down those arteries. But I know for me, just like the personal impact, I know I've sat at that bus stop and been like, I need to be where I need to be.
Yeah, definitely.
How do we get more people to think about riding the bus? Because it's the chicken and egg situation. If you don't have enough people riding, you don't have enough funds to expand. And a lot of people who have cars won't consider riding the bus a lot of times because they don't think the bus is for them, because they can afford a car so they can drive a car. And so the bus isn't just for people who can't afford cars. The buses here are great.
Right.
You know.
Well, the whole corridor plan along Nicholasville Road is really aiming at getting more housing along Nicholasville Road, so there will be that increased ridership, but that'll take a few years to have an impact.
I do. I mean, something that was lifted up, that corridor model. I mean, whether we're talking about Nicholasville Road, I know that the big projects we talked about were Nicholasville Road and the Town Branch project. But I know I live here in Gainesway, and we have an Armstrong Mill small area plan, and that matters in this conversation as well because we're trying to get sidewalks. When we talk about this conversation about walkability, those small area plans are places where I think I guess a missed opportunity to sort of say that with the large group, but these places where you can have large impact and neighborhood associations and council members and other stakeholders are engaged, and we like to see that activated.
Yeah, definitely. Anyone else on what of today's topics directs you most or directly affects you?
I don't know if it directly affects me or not because I don't know all the plans, but I live out in the rural services boundary and I live on a road where there are no sidewalks, but it is a cyclist, one of their favorite places to be. And it makes me incredibly nervous to drive most days because we're sharing the road. It's very narrow. And I just wonder, is there like a large plan to connect the two, sort of the urban and the rural, to make things a little more, I don't know, safe and cohesive or anything like that. But it's something that I think about all the time. Like I would gladly give up, 2 feet into my property just to make sure these bikers are safe. Because really crazy stuff happens.
Yeah.
People get hurt.
Definitely. That'd be a good question for Scott.
Yeah.
In relation to traffic and transportation, what data shared most surprised you? Or anything that you didn't know that you learned today?
I had no idea that Town Branch Commons was a thing. I knew the park was a thing. I did not know there was this trail planned. That just really blew my mind.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's really cool. You need to look into that if you have an extra minute. I've been following it for years and it's fascinating.
Yeah, it'll change a lot of I've seen renderings and it seems that, it'll have a huge impact on downtown in particular. Just the way that providing that extra green space. And also, it's because of Town Branch and some of the other projects going on downtown that we'll be able to make those adjustments to the transit center down there as well and make it my goodness, man, Vine Street, whew, folks crossing that street, there'll be some dedicated stops there, is my understanding. But I just think about the changes to the Lexington Center as well. Just that whole area will look a lot different. Look very cool, I think.
Yeah.
It'll be a lot more walkable.
Right. Part of what they're doing is a term I've heard elsewhere is a street diet, where you actually narrow the amount of car space. And if there's 4 lanes, maybe cut it down to 3 lanes or 2 lanes, so that you have room for the pedestrians and you have room for the bicyclists. And so that's part of the plan that I'm looking forward to.
Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't know that Scott's department was planning on looking at limestone and improving that for pedestrians and cyclists. So I thought that was good. It says we have to return to our session, but this was great. Thanks so much for talking with us and being here again. And I really hope everyone can join us on the 18th, where we'll have a whole lot of time to talk about these breakout session questions, since they've been rushed each week.
That's a good idea. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah.
Thank you all. Good to meet you all.
Thank you, Christian.
Yeah.
See everybody.
Good night.
Well, thank you all again for joining us this evening. So glad for everyone that could stay around. I know we lost some people with the time, but these were such important conversations. And again, our time frame with CPA this year did change because we're doing it over Zoom, which is why we felt it was so worthwhile to add the additional session, which will be putting it all together and continuing community conversations, which will be Tuesday the 18th. So again, keep on the lookout for the email about our equity and land use lunch and learn, which will be next Tuesday at noon, and then our CPA session next Tuesday evening, followed by our wrap-up session on Tuesday the 18th. If you can join us, that will be continuing the conversation and just really putting all these things together. So I hope that you all had excellent wrap-up sessions. And just to summarize, Fate Alliance advocates for infrastructure investments like we've discussed today inside our boundary and inside our urban core, focusing on investment within our existing city footprint in an equitable way. So making infrastructure more accessible, more resilient is a better use of our funds, our city funds, than trying to stretch those dollars to continue to support the sprawl development. There are enormous costs to growth, as all of us as citizens know, and focusing on our existing city footprint and investing our existing city funds in the projects that you've heard about today and that we've talked about that are so necessary to how we grow our city in a smart and responsible way. So thank you all again for joining us for our third week of Citizens Planning Academy. Please make sure to fill out the 4-question survey that you'll see tomorrow in your email. That gives us feedback. It helps give us tips. Please, be honest and give us as much feedback as you can. It's certainly welcome, and we'll continue to make program offerings and speaker offerings based on what we hear from you all. So we hope that you enjoyed this conversation. Special thanks to our speakers, to Christian, Scott, and Stan for joining us, sharing your knowledge with us, and to all of you for connecting. So if the note taker, if anyone took notes from the breakout sessions, which I forgot to mention, did take notes, please send those notes to info@fayealliance.com. Like we've been doing the past few weeks, we're going to share those breakout session notes, and it's always really valuable to see what the rest of the groups have been talking about. So again, be on the lookout for our follow-up email. We'll be sharing some resources in addition to what we've already shared. We'll be answering questions from the chat, and be on the lookout for the upcoming session information. And thank you guys again for your time and openness and engagement and discussion. So everyone have a lovely Tuesday evening, and we hope to see you all next week. This is when the Fate Alliance theme song music should come on. Have a great evening, everybody.